Hello everyone, it's Teddy here and welcome to the Publishing Performance Show. Now today we have an absolutely unbelievable interview with Kevin J. Anderson, who is one of the biggest names in the self-publishing world. Now he is one of the authors of the original Dune books, plus books in the Star Wars franchise, X-Files, and loads more. Now at the moment he's publishing his book through Kickstarter, so we're going to have a huge interview talking about how you can publish a book through Kickstarter with his Dan Shamble Zombie PI books. We're also going to be looking about how you can use networking to really build your author network and start growing your brand. And we're going to be looking at how you can attend conferences. You know, he's the founder of a Superstars conference, and also he's a professor at West Colorado University teaching a master's all about self-publishing and publishing and how you can become an author. This is an unbelievable interview. There's loads for you to take away from it. I think you're going to really enjoy it. So let me know what you think, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Hi everybody and welcome to the Publishing Performance Show. Today I'm here with Kevin J. Anderson. I've been so excited about this interview. And Kevin J. Anderson is the author of over 180 books, including books in the Star Wars, X-Files, and of the Dune universe, which is the most famous ones, which is one we want to talk about at the moment. And he's also got books in lots of other series, like published and self-published. So I think we're going to have loads to talk about today. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us.
Oh, glad to be here. It sounded like a very interesting podcast, so I'm glad you invited me.
Thank you very much. I mean, all of the audience here are, self-published authors and authors, so I think they're going to be really excited to hear what you've got to say. I thought we could start off just by talking a little bit about your background into starting writing, like how you got started and how you got the incredible opportunities to work on like the Dune and the Star Wars universes.
Sure. So I've been around quite a long time. My first novel was published, like 34 years ago or something like that. So I started out full on in the old school traditional publishing way. And I published a few original science fiction and fantasy novels from trad New York publishers. And it was on the basis of those novels that I came to Lucasfilm's attention, and they asked me if would I be interested in writing Star Wars books for them? And I went, well, I'd love to write Star Wars books. And all told, I did something like 54 novels and comics and graphic novels and young adult series and things. So I did a lot of Star Wars work, which kind of led into X-Files and Batman and Superman and some movie novelizations. There used to be, you might not remember this, but used to be that almost every movie that came out, somebody wrote the novel of it. And
Right,
that was like a good gig, that somebody would send me here's the movie script, and I had to turn it into a paperback novel, and people just, but now of course it's on streaming in 2 months. At that time you had to read the book while you waited for it to come out on DVD or even VHS tape or something. Anyway, so I did a lot of that. And then my biggest deal was when I connected with Brian Herbert, the son of Frank Herbert, the original author of Dune. And after Frank Herbert had passed away, we completed the story that Frank had started writing, and then we did a bunch of other prequels and some other books in the Dune universe, which led to, after many years working on the recent legendary Dune films that just came out, and the upcoming TV show called Dune Prophecy is from one of our Dune novels called Sisterhood of Dune. So we're kind of deeply involved in that universe. But to kind of rewind about maybe 14, 15 years, I was fully into the traditional publishing, but I was watching a bunch of big warning signs, and publishers were, there used to be a dozen or more big publishers that you could offer your books to. Now they're down to the big 5, and lines were being cut and bookstores were going out of business, and this indie publishing started up. So I was in kind of a golden situation because I had a fan base, a bunch of people had read my books already, and I had a whole lot of existing books that I had written that were out of print. And back in, I like to call them the good old days, publishers would let your books go out of print and they gave the rights back to the authors. So I had all these books I'd already written that just weren't being published. And so I figured out how to indie publish those and started doing that around 2009, 2010, and was sort of just a little bit behind the big first gold rush days. And I've been kind of a hybrid author ever since. I run my own publishing house. We've published over 400 titles from 100 plus authors. I've got I run Kickstarters and Patreons and all kinds of things that it's opportunities that authors have now that, boy, when I was starting out, you had to go with the big boys and you had to do what they told you to do. And
Yeah,
that was your choice. And I did that, but then those choices were no longer the right choices. And then I had other options. So
yeah. When
as
we were
your
talking,
audience knows, I'm sure.
when we were talking before the call, you mentioned that we've had, even when you started out writing, even back then, people were saying like indie author is not going to work, and people have basically been saying the same thing ever since. And you have to go down the self-published route, so down the published route. You think that's still the case now? You don't have to be going down the published route. The self-published route is absolutely a great place to go down.
Well, I mean, when I first started out, and I'm going to sound like an old fart if I keep saying that. When I first started out, way back, but it was sort of this doom and gloom. It was so hard to break in. It was like this one in a million chance you would ever get your book published, and you had to go to a slush pile with hundreds, if not thousands, of other novel manuscripts waiting there, and you had to get an agent, and whenever you did get something published, all of my colleagues would be telling me that, oh, this is the worst time ever to get into publishing and it's everything's so bad out there. And then I started writing Star Wars books and hitting the bestseller list. And then they were still telling me this is the worst time ever to get into publishing. And year after year, that's all I heard. But, it's completely turned around now that I think this is the best time ever because look, anybody can get their book published now. You don't, you might not be a good book and you might not
Yeah,
sell any copies of it, but I never had that option before. That there were so many people that wrote a book that never ever saw the light of day. And now you can get your book published. It doesn't take you don't need a PhD to figure out how to do a KDP ebook or something like that.
yeah,
I mean, you can get your book out there, but then you get to the next hurdle of, okay, now who wants to read it and who's going to buy it and all that. So you've become more than a writer. And in fact, I don't know anybody who's just, all I want to do is write books and do no other part of the work. I don't know that those writers can survive anymore, or
yeah.
certainly not the indie route.
No, possibly not going to make it. It's I was speaking to Isabel Knight recently about like building like about author PR, and essentially she was saying you've got to really look at it as a business now, not just focusing on the writing. It's got to be looking at your whole author brand and how you can build that whole relationship up with your audience and the marketing side as well.
Well, and just think about like musicians. You might just want to be a musician and write music and play it, but if you don't want to go on stage and go from like bar band to bar band and perform, well, then who's going to listen to your music?
Yeah,
And that's part of the job, and it has always been part of a creative's job to find an audience. I mean,
yeah.
minstrels used to go around from kingdom to kingdom. They had to get paid, right? I would personally, I would love to just sit here and write books all day long and never do another thing with it and just have the royalty checks come in. But,
Yeah.
that doesn't happen.
With your writing, was there much difference between doing all of the writing like entirely from your own the ideas that you came up with yourself compared to writing it for the other people? For example, like with the Dune books, what was the differences between the two?
Well, it's still writing. I mean, I was always a fanboy. I grew up, I mean, I saw Star Wars when it was first in the movie theater. I loved Star Wars and I had, the Millennium Falcon model that I built for my bedroom and stuff like that. So I was always a fan. I watched Star Trek all the time and I watched all the TV shows. And in fact, when I was a brand new writer, just in high school and stuff, I would write my own Star Trek stories. And
Right. Okay.
I didn't realize at the time that you weren't allowed to get them published unless you just did fan fiction. But I started out that way and I love, it has to be something I love. I mean, I really do love Dune. I really do love Star Wars. And
Yeah.
although Dune's something a little bit different because it really is just me and Brian who are carrying on that,
Yeah.
the fictional legacy. But for the writers who say, how can you write in somebody else's universe with somebody else's characters? How can you write Luke Skywalker? It's not mine. I have to do it. No, well, you know, every writer has to be bound by certain parameters. If I'm writing a story that's set in London, well, there are certain details of London that I have to get right.
Yeah.
And if I'm writing a story set in Star Wars, there are certain Star Wars details that I have to get right.
Mm.
And I'm researching a fictional place instead of a real place.
Yeah.
But I really I put as much work into those books as everything else. I don't want to write anything that I don't have 100% coming from my heart.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And with that world building you're talking about, like it's not just the Dune and the Star Wars books that have that really rich world. You also your own writing has you have the exact same thing where you're creating that world which is really relatable to people. Like you said, if you're talking about London, it needs to be good. When you're doing that world, how do you keep organized with like all of the different moving parts? Because
Yeah.
it's literally just in your head.
Well, I even when I was in university, I would just suck at taking notes. I would try to take notes and I would lose track of what the lecturer was saying, and I I got it better if I just focused and gave it my full attention.
Right.
And when I'm writing a series, I mean, I've got this huge science fiction series that's up to like 15 books now. I just I just keep it in my head and I keep going. And the problem is if you stop for a few years and write other things, then come back to it, then you do forget all the details
Yeah.
about the outcome. So that means you got to reread all the books and kind of load them back up. Um, I really, really wish I had been diligent while writing them, that I had kept a like a Bible or something that just listed all the planets and all the characters. And I just don't have the patience for that. I'm off writing the next chapter, and um,
I was reading an interview of J.K. Rowling the other day on YouTube, and she was saying how when she's talking about her characters, she's got like whole backstories for all of them, where she can like recall like where they went to university, all that sort of thing. But your approach is just to keep writing and just it'll come out.
well, and I do a lot of editing and I rewrite
Yeah,
it,
of
and I
course.
have test readers and they'll often catch me on like, wait, you contradicted this in another book, and they usually fix it in time. If I don't fix it, well, then that's the inspiration for another book that you can explain whatever the contradiction was.
Yeah.
So,
What was the process like getting the getting your novels into filming? Because I know you're a producer in some of the Dune films. Like, what was that? What was that process like? Was it very straightforward?
it was long and agonizing is what it was. I mean, there, for just to get the Dune movie, and Dune by Frank Herbert is like the best-selling science fiction novel of all time, and it's won all these awards. It's sort of like science fiction's version of Lord of the Rings. It's
Yeah.
everybody's read it, everybody knows it, and that still took 25 years or so to get going. I have several of my other projects that are in production, in development, in whatever, which means that people in Hollywood are talking about them, and I'm waiting for the film to actually start rolling. So
Yeah.
it is it is a very, very long and frustrating process, and I my attitude is kind of I would love for it to happen, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I'm busy writing other things, and um, you just you can't believe anything they say. Oh, we're gonna make this TV show next year, and 5 years go by and they still haven't made it. And um, it's it's a crapshoot. I mean, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. I have a very kind of a jaded attitude toward that. I mean, I love it that they're interested. I hope that they will actually pay me money for the option or something like that. But I don't lose sleep over it, counting down the days, because it may or it may not happen. We've got one right now called Stalag X. It's like human POWs in an alien concentration camp that I wrote with Stephen L. Sears, who was the producer of Xena, Warrior Princess, way
Yep.
back.
Yep.
And we wrote this graphic novel in something like 2003, and it started coming out as comic issues, but then that comic publisher went out of business, so we got the rights back and we sold it to another comic publisher, and they brought out one issue and then they went out of business, and then we got it to another one, and then it finally got published as a graphic novel, and then it got optioned again, and then the option lapsed, and it got optioned again, and then the option lapsed, and right now it is optioned by Francis Lawrence, the guy that did the Hunger Games and Red Sparrow and I Am Legend, and he's optioned it, and that option just expired, but he renewed it because he still wants to make it, and they're getting the script written. And okay, it's been 3 years though. We're waiting to see something happen, but that's how it happens in Hollywood. You
Yeah.
and I'm not saying he's making things up. He's really earnestly trying to do it, and I would love for it to happen. I just I'm not waiting to pay the bills with whatever comes in, because it might be 10 years from now before
Yeah.
it happens.
I was
It
speaking to a
requires
writer the other day.
patience, is what I'm saying. Lots of patience and optimism.
Yeah. I was speaking to a writer the other day who has been writing a series of novels with the aim of them being turned into a TV series. That was kind of the way she wrote them. Is that the way you approach writing some of those books, or was it just write the books and if they get taken on, that's great?
Yeah, the books have to be what the ultimate goal is. I mean, I write books because I write the books, and if somebody does take my books and turn it into a TV show, it might be a Broadway musical before they get done with it. Who knows what they're going to change. You try to be in a position where you can do some creative control and insist that no, you don't put submarines on the planet Dune. You actually have to have sand and sandworms,
Yeah.
but doesn't always happen. And but the thing is, even if they make a bad movie or a bad TV show, it still sells a whole lot of your original book. And the book is what I wrote. The book is my creation.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I want people to read and remember.
Yeah, amazing. So inspiring hearing this because yeah, so many people, it's like their dream to have this sort of writing put on the screen like that.
Well, it's literally one of those chasing the pot of gold and or the fairy lights and don't I've known people who have literally given up their career because they're chasing after the option and they believe that this is going to get made and it never gets made, and then in the meantime they've stopped writing books, so they've lost all their readers because they haven't produced any new books. And see, I that's why I even love the indie publishing even more, because I am in complete control. I can publish the book as fast as I want it to come out. I have series that, I'll do a new book every year. I'll run a Kickstarter for it to see if the fans are still interested in it.
Yeah.
And I control the release date. I control what the cover art looks like. And of course it makes me sound like a control freak, but I I like being the one who decides things rather than relying on other people, because when you have large teams doing things, somebody might be sick that day, somebody might get a divorce and decide to stop working on it. There are all kinds of other factors. And if your livelihood is counting on that, I would rather count on my own reliability instead of a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah, brilliant. That's really good advice. Thanks. You talk about your Kickstarter. So I know you're right. You're launching a Kickstarter like now at the moment, basically for your new series, the Dan Shamble
Yes.
books. Well, not your new series. Sorry, the new book in the series of the Dan Shamble, the zombie PI books. So Kickstarter that's going to be really interesting to loads of the authors on this show, because I've seen it talks about a lot in the industry at the moment. It feels like quite a difficult thing to do. But can you tell me a bit about that campaign, how that's worked?
Well, so I wrote this series that I just loved called Dan Shamble Zombie PI. It's sort of like the Naked Gun and the Addams Family. It's just really silly and funny. It's meant to be laugh out loud. He's a zombie PI and he solves cases with werewolves and ghosts and mummies, and his best friend is a human cop, and he's got a lawyer partner, and he's got a ghost girlfriend, and they it's silly, and it's lots of dumb puns and kind of intrinsic humor. And I fell in love with it. I loved writing it. My wife says I'm in such a good mood when I'm writing these books, and they're just funny. And I published the first four of them through a traditional publisher, and
Okay.
they didn't take off the way I had wanted them to. And again, this is why I kind of like to control it, because the other publisher, they brought them out like too far apart, because these are fast and fun, entertaining books. You don't want to wait a year and a half to read the next one. You want the next one right away. And they charged $15 for the ebook, and then they complained that the ebook sales weren't very good. And I went, well, duh, you're charging too much for it.
Yeah.
So finally, I got the rights back to them, and I republished them in my own Wordfire Press. And then I did a couple of story collections, and I wrote another novel in the series, and I just released it, but I didn't like really push it or promote it. I just kind of put it out there, and I just wasn't. I was kind of depressed that the series hadn't taken off, because I really loved it. And the fans kept writing. They said, "Well, where's the next one? Where's the next one?" And a friend of mine who had done a bunch of successful Kickstarters, he said, "Well, if the fans want it, why don't you run a Kickstarter and have them put their money where their mouth is?"
Hmm.
And I said, I mean, at the time, I had supported some Kickstarters, but I thought a Kickstarter was, I'm a poor starving author and I can't afford to publish my book, so give me money. And that's not what it is at all. A Kickstarter is basically a way to give your core fans like early access to this book, like months before the rest of the public can see it. It gives your fans a way to be like, they can get a character named after themselves if they bid at a certain level, or um, they can help create the cover art, or they're involved in the process. And we can give them exclusive Kickstarter only things. And so I didn't know what was going to happen. So I said, all right, if you want another Dan Shamble book, I love this series, but I kind of was letting my zombie PI die. And so we ran a Kickstarter, and holy cow, it made me 3 times as much money as the traditional publisher was paying for those books.
Oh my
And
God.
I went, oh, okay, this might be the way to do it. So,
Yeah.
so I wrote that book and published it, and then I got a bunch of Kickstarter backers.
Yeah.
And I had another series that was called The Dragon Business, sort of a medieval con man comedy thing. And I loved that book, and I wanted to do a sequel. But Amazon has their own publishing imprint called 47 North, and they had printed the first one, but they weren't interested in another one. But I wanted to do the series, so I said, okay, let's do a Kickstarter and see if you want to do the series. Again, bam, I got 2 or 3 times what I got paid in the first place for it.
Yeah.
So I'm like full on, hey, Kickstarters are the way to go. And then, so the following year, I did another Dan Shamble novel Kickstarter, and that one also was very successful. And the one, so the one that's running right now, as we're talking about this, is this year's Dan Shamble novel. I try to do one every year, but I wanted to make the campaign even bigger, not just here's another novel. So I've got a new novel and I've got a new story collection. So there's 2 books coming out with it.
Yeah.
But we've also got a new card game that we've done with a gaming company, a Dan Shamble card game, and a we did a jigsaw puzzle. The cover art for the new novel called Horn Dogs is really just gorgeous. It's my zombie PI with his gun drawn in a Mexican standoff with a unicorn pointing at his horn at him. So this is a Dan Shamble solves the mystery of the secret society of unicorns. So that's a fun one. So we did the jigsaw puzzle, a card game, a story collection, and a new novel. So we're calling it the Zombie PI Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And that's the campaign running, and it'll end like the end of October or early November, something like, I don't remember the exact date, but
Yeah.
anyway, so support the Kickstarter if you want it. But Kickstarter is a way for indie authors basically to get an advance,
Yeah.
because all the actual readers are paying money up front for the book so that I can pay to produce the book and then send them the copies when it's done.
Yeah.
And if it makes enough money in the Kickstarter, then I can actually pay my food bills and stuff too.
So with your books, obviously you've got a name behind you for your Kickstarter. Kickstarter's got a bit of an advantage over people maybe who are just starting out. So if you were just starting out, is there a best place to start with trying to get those payments for your first books?
Well, that's kind of the question for all authors, that you have to start as soon as possible to start building your platform, whether it's building your social media presence, your website, your newsletter. Everything you do should be trying to get followers, because those are the ones that are going to buy your books.
Yeah.
And if you go to writers' conferences, if you go to comic cons, you go to places just so that people will start to notice you. Look, I've been doing this a long time, and I've got 24 million copies of my books in print. So I do have an advantage because I have a readership.
Yeah.
But it's never too soon to start. And in fact, here's kind of another new thing. I just launched my Patreon, because a lot of other authors have a Patreon.
Yeah.
And I just launched it. It's Kevin J. Anderson. You can look it up on Patreon.
I
But
saw some of your
that's
recipes on there.
well, and I do a lot of cooking. I'm a very good cook, and I post pictures, and everybody's always asking me for my recipes. So now it's
Yeah.
like, all right, well, if you want my baked chili rellenos recipe, you've got to go join my Patreon. And but the other cool thing is we need to. I'm giving them like early access that if you're at a certain level, the moment I finish a novel, I will send them a PDF of the Word manuscript. So they get to read it even before the Kickstarter people do, because they get to
Amazing.
read the manuscript. And if they read it fast and tell me I made a mistake, well, I might even be able to fix it before we publish it. So the early access is one thing, and another thing we're doing is sort of a monthly Zoom call so that the fans can just chat with me and we can talk about stuff. And so Patreon's another thing that, again, when I started out, none of these options were on the table. We never were able to do this sort of thing. We're at the mercy of what the big traditional publishers marketing department decided to do. And I I like having the options. It's
Yeah.
these are glory days, I think.
Amazing to have that touch point with your fans where you can even chat to them over a Zoom call or like, get them to be your advanced reviewers as well for your book. And I think even a small
Well,
author would be able to do
there,
something like that, like just start getting those,
you know,
even if they
you're
weren't getting
there's a
Patreon.
there's a thing, I can't remember who came up with it, but it's called your 1,000 true fans. That if you can come up with 1,000 people that want to read your books and they're dedicated and they go out and buy every book, then you're a successful author. You don't have to depend on Waterstones or Barnes and Noble or any big bookstore chains. That if you got 1,000 people who buy your book, you can pretty much have a career as a writer.
Yeah. There's a great book about
Better to
that
have a
by,
million people, but 1,000 is a good place to start.
yeah. There's a great book about that by Pat Flynn. I don't know if you know him, but it's called Superfans,
Oh
and
yeah.
he's got the smart passive income. That book's really good. So if people want to think about those the first 1,000 fans, that's a really good resource to start with. It's something I've used lots.
Well,
Um,
and I try I've got like three Facebook pages, I've got Twitter, I've got Instagram, well, I don't do a blog much anymore, but it's exhausting. In fact, it's probably 70% of my time, and the other 30% is actually writing books. But um, if nobody reads your books, then there's no point in writing them. So it's the investment you have to make.
do you outsource any of this work to other people? Like it's almost exhausting hearing about so many things.
Um, I mean, some of the actual work, like I pay somebody to lay out my books, and I pay cover designers, and I have a proofing team, and I have somebody who I write my newsletter, but I have somebody format it and send it out
Yeah,
on MailChimp and everything. So whatever I can delegate, I do, but the fan interaction is not something I want to delegate because I
no, of
want them
course.
to genuinely interact with me. And of course, the writing is not something I can delegate. That's something only I can do.
Yeah.
Um, Face-to-face meeting the fans at a Comic Con, well, that's only I can't hire a stunt double. It has to be me.
So obviously when I speak to you, I'm like, you've got so many projects going on, and it makes me feel like I'm not working hard enough because you've got obviously your films you're working on, you've got your books, of course, you're writing all that stuff
And
with your
comic
fans.
books, I write monthly comic books, and I've got my newsletter, and I'm a graduate professor. I teach graduate students in publishing, and
Yes, I
I
was going to
help
talk about
run
that
a
next.
big writing conference, and we travel a lot. I just came back from Dragon Con, which is the largest pop culture con in the world, I think. And then we got Salt Lake Comic Con coming up, and we have writers' workshops that are coming. I don't know. I like to keep busy.
Yeah. Well, you've got just talking about one of those things you just mentioned. You're a professor at Western Colorado University, and
Yes.
yeah, you're teaching a master's course in publishing books. So it doesn't just cover the writing; it covers like basically the whole business of the writing too. So what can people expect from that course? What does it cover?
Well, I mean, the university actually has a master's degree in genre fiction, so there you can be, and I would have loved to take that when I was starting out. So you can learn all about romance and science fiction and mysteries and fantasy and all that kind of stuff. So you can get your MFA on how to write genre fiction, but we like to say that we can teach you how to write, but then we teach you what to do with it afterward. So like I said, I've spent decades in the publishing industry, in the trad publishing industry, but I've also spent many years running my own publishing house and doing the indie stuff. So I what I teach is sort of a half and half traditional and indie publishing, but we teach contracts and copyright and book design and fonts, and we make the students design their own covers. They do their own editing. They lay out their books. They market the books. They run ads. They do like everything from start to finish. And they do two main projects. One, they edit an original anthology, which we get funding from Draft to Digital, which most of your audience should be familiar with
Yep.
what Draft to Digital is. So they fund us every year. They give us $5,000 so that we can pay pro rates for the short stories in this anthology. And the students come up with the idea and they read the slush pile, and there's usually like 500 submissions that come in. And in fact, I when this is being broadcast, our anthology will have just closed. So it's called "Confounding Cupids when Love Goes Awry," I think is the subtitle. Sort of humorous, romanticy kind of stuff like that. But the students came up with that. They wrote the call for submissions. They will be reading all these stories. They'll argue over which ones they want to accept. They have to write the rejection slips. They issue the contracts. They copy edit the stories. They put the book together, and then we have this big book launch just before they graduate with their master's degree. And then for a solo project, they reissue a classic of literature, a public domain, like an H.G. Wells book or a Jules Verne book or something like that. They pick
Yep.
something that they're passionate about, and then um, they get the text and they edit it, they proof it, they design the book, they lay it out, they do every single step hands on. So that by the time they graduate, which is in 1 year, so it's not a huge long investment of time, in 1 year they come out of it with two books published with their names on the cover that they've actually done. And one of my criticisms about other academic programs is that they're all very esoteric and you don't learn anything practical. Well, in
Yep.
my publishing program, you actually learn how to do things. And I guess I don't know if you want to put a link in there, but my website is wordfire.com, like
Yep.
what words on fire, wordfire.com. And there's a whole section there about the graduate program. And we
Yep.
we are open for applications. We usually fill up every year, but I would love to have people from your podcast come on it because they're already interested in indie publishing, and we, as far as I know, this is the only graduate program that fully emphasizes indie publishing rather than just getting a job at some New York publishing house.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely put a link into the chat about it, and yeah, definitely go and check that out if you're interested. I mean, is it in? It's in person in America.
Oh no, that's the other thing. So it's called low residency, so that means that it's all online except for 1 week in person in Colorado.
Right. Okay. Great. In teaching so many other people during your course, it must be a great way to sort of deepen your own understanding in the industry as well. How has that helped to your own knowledge?
Well, it's really kind of intimidating because if I'm the professor teaching them the stuff, I better keep up on all the new stuff happening. And a lot of these are very active, very dedicated indie authors already. And they sometimes know more than I do about some of the subjects, which is kind of good because publishing is not like, you know, teaching ancient Greek or something like that. This changes every month. We have to rewrite our syllabus every single year. Like, oh, that's no longer relevant, and this is new stuff. And 2 years ago we didn't even have to mention AI, and now we got to mention AI and talk about it. And
Yeah.
there's just everything's changing. And because I'm the teacher on this stuff, that means I really have to spend a lot of time keeping on the top of my game, and so I go to like Author Nation every year, and we have something called Superstars writing seminars that we run that's very indie focused, and I just know a lot of people in the industry, and all of your indie author friends know that when we get together, all we talk about is publishing and writing. We don't talk about like sports or anything else. That's our conversation. We go out for beer, and that's all we talk about is vellum and cover design and draft to digital and Kindlepreneur and Kickstarters and Patreons and um,
Yeah.
I guess the more boring cocktail party conversation, unless you're another indie author.
I'm going to Author Nation this year, first time. Really excited about that. And so
We'll,
yeah, I'm
we'll
going
meet
to.
in person then. I'm looking forward to it. I went every year when it was 20 books, and so this is it's just it's a new kind
Yeah.
of a makeover. So I'm very supportive of them. We want to see what they can do.
Oh, great! I already spoke to Craig Martell a few weeks ago, and he was like saying how it's going to be changing. It's going to be getting better as well. So I think if he's given it the stamp of approval, then it must be good.
Well, he was our Zeus on Mount Olympus from 20 books, but I I think I think he was a little bit worn out because it's a big job,
Yeah.
and so I'm happy to have him get a little bit of less stress in his life.
Yeah, Las Vegas is quite hard work as well, isn't it? I mean, you just mentioned there superstars and talking about conferences. So tell us a bit about superstars and also how networking has helped your journey, because I do a lot of networking for all my businesses that I've run, and I found it to be one of the most useful ways to meet people and to grow my business, both from the stuff you learn and also the people you meet. But tell us a bit about superstars and how that's worked for you.
Yeah. So Superstars we founded about 15 years ago now, and that at the time there just was no business of writing conference out there. There were all kinds of writers conferences that teach you, plotting and characters and things, but nobody taught you what to do when you filed for copyright or how to read your contracts and this was started just when ebooks were taking off. So what do you do with ebooks and how do you do this? And my I was quite a top best-selling author at the time, and I had a bunch of best-selling author friends, and we started talking like once you become a bestseller, there's not too many people that you can about, or to complain about stuff, and because they all just go, "Gee, I wish I had your problem." So we met. It was me and Brandon Sanderson, my wife Rebecca Mesta, who I co-wrote a bunch of Star Wars books with me, David Farland, who was a New York Times bestselling fantasy author, and Eric Flint, who's like the god of alternate history. We all got together and just spent a weekend exchanging information about here's the business stuff that I learned that they don't know, or that they learned that I don't know. And we just had this exchange of ideas. And we realized it was so useful that we wanted to just take it on the road, that maybe other people would learn this as well. So we founded the first Superstars writing seminar, and we held it in Pasadena, California. I think we had 60 people attend it, but we just loved it. It was this huge network, and everybody was sharing their information, and everybody was learning, and it became such a tight-knit group that the next year it grew, and then it kept growing, and we got to the point where you have to cap it at 400 people.
Yeah.
And it's held in Colorado Springs every year in February. So it's beautiful snow-capped mountains behind us. And so we've had tons and tons of industry leaders and best-selling authors and successful indie authors. And we have lots of sponsors from Draft to Digital to Atticus to Audible.com and ACX and all kinds of different people working in the industry. So it is much along the same lines as 20 Books and Author Nation, but we're the OG business of writing conference, we say. So
Yeah.
we've been around, but we've got a great network. And to get back to what your comment was, the network is everything. I mean, this is like your safety net. It is your support system. It is your informational. It's your hive mind database. Like, does anybody know how to fix this in Vellum? I can't figure it out. And it's just this constant, everybody's learning, everybody's sharing. And somebody said this to me, that of all the industries that they had been working with, they have never ever seen anything like indie publishing, about how helpful and supportive and cooperative the entire community is.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't see that in like software developers where everybody's sharing their new secret of how they did something.
Yeah.
Well, if somebody at 20 books to 50K figured out a trick to make your Amazon rankings go higher, you couldn't stop them from shouting it out. I mean, you would think somebody would keep it as a trade secret, but nobody does. We all share it. And so Superstars is a huge network of mine. My graduate students, I've now unleashed 53 master's degree publishing people on the world, and they're all going out and teaching and helping and learning things. And I enjoy being part of a supportive system rather than a destructive system where everybody's stabbing you in the back.
Yeah.
That's
I
not my kind of thing.
I do a lot of networking with Amazon product sellers, and it's nowhere near as supportive. Like, people are much more secretive about the methods they've used to like game the rankings or something like that. So yeah, don't be afraid to speak to other authors, basically.
Well, and it's not necessarily gaming the rankings. It's just that, oh, did you know that you could put extra keywords if you do this, and like tricks and helpful suggestions and things like that.
Yeah, no, of course. With your networking, do you have any like groups, like Facebook groups or anything like that, that you particularly have found useful for you?
Well, my master's degree students have their own group with all the alumni on it, and they are constantly sharing things. Superstars has a really big group of all attendees and past attendees, so that's its own network of, I don't know, like 1,000 people now, just all
Yeah,
those, and they're not just lurkers. These are cutting edge people actually in the trenches, actually doing stuff. The 20 books to 50K Facebook page is just loaded with information. There there are no secrets out there.
yeah,
You're just going to be overwhelmed by data. You have to sift through it and find what's going to be useful for you.
yeah. With the superstars, it's next year, the next event, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
when's
next
the next?
February. I think it's the first week of February. So
Brilliant.
it's at superstarswriting.com. I think
Yeah.
it's search for superstars writing, you'll find it.
And what topics can people expect from it this year? Have you got any particular speakers you're excited to unveil, or is it all still under wraps?
I'm not sure that they've announced all of them yet. I think some of them are featured on the website, but we have a whole day that is sort of masterclass level craft day, so that there are people really. Jonathan Mayberry is a New York Times bestselling action thriller writer, and he teaches you how to write fight scenes. And I give a whole workshop on world building. And I one of my big things is I do all my work by dictation. I walk around and I dictate. And so I give a workshop on how you can get into doing dictation, because it'll double your writing speed. It really does. We do that. There are Kickstarter workshops. There will be Patreon workshops. There are like real hands-on, useful information that, and I think we have like 5 or 6 tracks of programming going on, and there's a VIP banquet and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah. You even wrote the book on being a dictator, called On Being a Dictator.
Yes, called On Being a Dictator. And in fact, I just updated it because it was, I think, about 5 years old. So we needed to add things about AI transcription and all kinds of new advances that have come up. And we'll be releasing that update in the next couple of months. But yeah, I wrote it. I just got tired of people saying, "Oh, I tried dictation for 5 minutes and it didn't work for me, so I couldn't do it." And I went, "Well, you didn't try typing for 5 minutes and gave up on it. I mean, it's a learned skill. You have to get better at it." And truly, I'm in a quandary right now, because I've gotten to the point where I do all of my writing by walking and hiking and dictating. That's how I do everything. And since you're just seeing me from the waist up, you can't see. I've broken my foot a couple of weeks ago, so I can't walk around anymore, and I'm now being very frustrated because I've got a book to write and I can't do it my normal way. So, but I'll sit in my chair on the back porch and I'll just talk to myself and get lots of writing done.
And what do you do once you've recorded all of your dictation? What do you do from that? Do you just transcribe it yourself by typing it out, or do you
Oh
use some
no,
tools?
no, no, that would take forever. I used to have an actual human typing service, and they did quite well for me, but now I use something called Mac Whisper, which is an AI transcription that takes word for word what I've dictated and transcribes it, and then I clean it up. The Chat GPT will put in your quote marks and commas and everything like that. So it's not doing the writing for me, it's just transcribing for me. But
Yeah,
it's really fast and um, fairly cheap, and I can get it done that way. So
yeah.
I do the dictation, then I plop my recorder into the cradle and I have it transcribed while I'm off eating lunch or something.
That book's available on Amazon as well. I think I'm going to read it now because that
Yeah,
sounds really
it's
interesting.
called On Being a Dictator. But one of the big things that I do is that I do finished prose, but I've been doing this for decades. Instead of thinking up a sentence and typing it, I think up a sentence and I speak it. But I've trained myself to do that. It's like reading the audiobook in my head. But if you're just starting out, you're not going to be at that level. So one of the things I advocate is just use it like for brainstorming. If you're about to you're trying to plot your big epic fantasy, we'll go for a walk and just sort of, hey, how about if we did this with the dragon coming? Or here's the legend of the 5 scrolls, and you can just sort of do notes to yourself, and it's a lot better than walking around with a notebook in your hand trying to scribble things as you're walking. And um, my dialogue is really great because the way my characters speak are the way people would actually speak because I'm speaking it, not typing it. If
Yeah.
you're typing it, you might not notice that you just put four words that start with the letter S in a row. And
Did
but when you're
you
talking, it doesn't happen.
do you ever find you're doing like the accents of your characters whilst you're dictating?
I do that, and in fact, it's it's useful now because it helps the Mac Whisper transcription to know when I'm having different characters talking. It will
Yeah.
recognize that it's different voice patterns.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like role playing. I really get into the character when I'm writing it, and I try to speak in their voice so that the dialogue sounds a little bit more personal.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. Could a book almost be written like in improv? It sounds like you're just doing improv with yourself. Like,
Well, I
could
mean,
you get a?
I've done this on like convention panels or something where it is like an improv where they will throw a story prompt at me and I'll just spout off, come up with a story.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, there are other writers who do that with a keyboard and they'll type on demand, but I'm kind of better at just sort of speaking it out loud and talking.
Yeah. Brilliant. A lot of the stuff we've talked about today, obviously, you've got years of experience. So, but for people just starting out, and what's the marketing things they should be focusing on? You think on at first? You know, they've got just maybe the first few books. Are there particular ones you think would be the best ones to focus on?
Well, and I mentioned earlier, but it is never too early to start building your platform. Like
Yeah.
if you want to be a writer, start your Facebook page. Hi, I'm a writer and I like to write books about dragons. And and then you might get 10 people to follow your page because they saw you said dragons. And then you might get 100 people, and then all of those people are potential readers. And so start start building up your identity as a writer as soon as you can. And then the other thing is you need to write a lot. It's like an athlete. You get better by practicing. And you you can't just write a book and hope for it to be a bestseller. Just write and then keep writing, and then you build on the next one and you build your fan base. And maybe you had sold 100 copies of your first novel, but then your next one might sell 200 copies, and then just keep building it.
Yeah.
And it is a long, slow process. If you are in this as a get rich quick scheme, well, that's probably not the best approach.
I think that's probably a great message to end on. It's not quick, get rich quick scheme. It's got to practice and
Right.
to hone your craft down. Yeah, well, thank you so much for your
Awesome.
time. I really appreciate it today. I think it's been a great episode. Everyone's going to learn a lot about your background and your writing. If people want to get in touch with you, or follow you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Well, like wordfire.com is my main website, which sadly doesn't get updated as often as it should. My Patreon is Kevin J. Anderson. So if you go there, you'll get a lot of
Recipes.
like up to date recipes, hiking photos, first look at my draft manuscripts and things. I'm on Facebook as official Kevin J. Anderson page. Twitter, I think it's the real KJA, my initials. Oh, X, sorry, not Twitter. And I go to tons of conventions, and I go to Comic Cons and writers conferences, and we hope to see you at Superstars or
Yeah,
Author Nation. There's a
brilliant.
couple of obvious places.
Thank you. Well, thank you
And
so much.
if you
Sorry.
check out my Kickstarter before it ends, I hope you look at the Dan Shamble stuff and Patreon or whatever. Just I got a lot of books out there. I hope you find one that you're gonna enjoy.
Usually we ask people we're interviewing, like, what's one book that they recommend that everyone should be reading? But I think,
I would tell them to start with the very first of the Dan Shamble books called Death Warmed Over. And if you like that, there's 10 more of those. So that's a good
yeah,
place to start.
you had me with the Naked Gun references. I think that sounds like right up my street.
Well,
So,
it's a bunch of really stupid puns, and I love it. I write so much big serious stuff like Dune that it's fun to just be able to goof off sometimes.
yeah, yeah. I mean, June is quite serious, isn't it? So,
Not a lot of comic relief in Dune, right?
no, no. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. It's been great to speak to you. Hopefully, I'll speak to you soon. I'll see you at the conference.
Thanks, Teddy.